Hi, and welcome back. So, today I'm going to stay on the theme of technology, but I'm going to piggyback on someone who I find really, really interesting and has seen into the future, warned us about a few things that might take place, and maybe her warnings have also fallen a little bit on deaf ears. I don't know. Let's discuss this. So, this is Sherry Turkle. She's an MIT professor, and she wrote a book called Alone Together in 2011. I have the revised 17 edition, but she's equally been giving talks. There's one from October 2023, where she's kind of leaning more into this idea of AI because the technology has improved so much. And in that talk, she basically says, I don't want to ask what can AI do. I want to ask what is AI doing to us. And so I think that impact on who we are as people, who we are as a community, and the quality of our relationships, that's what she's really interested in. And so what I want to do today is kind of run you through a little bit of what she's talking about. I know some of my videos have Clara and the Sun, for example, was like a story around a little child with the AI companion. And I know that some of the books that I've talked about previously have gone through these themes. So I do encourage you to go see those if you're interested in the topic. But for the moment, I'm going to make a distinction between some of the things that she says about AI, and especially she talks about sociable robots, right? And us actually transferring our primary relationship in some ways to a robot, and how that differs when you're an adult and when you're a child. So, firstly, when she says that when adults are starting to have relationships with these sociable robots, right? Whether they are in the form of pets, whether they are in the form of caretakers, whether they are in the form of a boyfriend or a girlfriend. In some cases, she's talking about actual robots, which, by the way, look pretty real if you've gone and seen some stuff online. Or increasingly, also, people have avatars online, that look like people, but they're still across a screen. But, she's talking about both of them. But she's basically saying that are we settling? Because in the end, even though it looks like it understands you, it sounds like it knows what you're saying, it even professes to love you, it is not capable of emotion. It is not capable of the feelings that you think it's capable of. And so actually it's like this pretense, or this simulation of feelings. And is that good enough for us? And the answer honestly seems to be, for a lot of people, yes. They seem to think that well, if I'm getting what I need, right, it doesn't matter if I'm getting it from an AI or a robot. For me, it's real, and so that's good enough for me. And this kind of comes up again and again in all the studies they've done at MIT, where she's kind of been a fly on the wall, from the 70s, where when you give a child or an adult a robot or a sociable robot, or an avatar or whatever it is, immediately, because it's human like, they want it to like them. They want to be important for the robot. They actually then start, because it's very difficult for us to have feelings. We want something to like us, and we obviously have feelings for it as well. So then people start ascribing feelings to this robot, thinking, oh, well, the robot is tired, the robot is, loves me, really likes my joke, or whatever it might be. And so it's like this robot kind of love, that exists. And so she thinks that the harm really is that we're not expecting more of people. Like, instead of going back into community and being like, where are my friends, where's my family, where's my mother, sister, brother, my neighbor, you're actually saying, that's all right, I don't need those people, I've got this robot on my side, and that's good enough for me. So she thinks that that's not really that's not really a good thing. But I'll give you the caveat as well. A lot of the robotics have taken place in Japan, right? A lot of those early experiments, because Japan has an aging society, and they don't have enough young people who can take care of the older people. And so they've actually got these amazing robots. One looks like a seal, and the older people, they pet it and it purrs, and they just feel like they are nurturing something, and something is loving them back. And so it gives them this sense of companionship. And so can you really deny that? In some ways, I have to wonder. When it comes to kids, obviously I have a lot more I have a lot more to say, because I think for kids it's also about essential development that has to take place in those years. So what she basically says is that in her experiments, and her experiments that she was watching, A lot of kids who like did not get that kind of attention at home, maybe the parents were working, or maybe the parents had, all other kinds of problems. Those kids really got attached to these robots, especially attached to these robots because it was giving them something that they didn't have otherwise, right? um, she says that kids are also very easy to accept, that this is a robot, and they accept the failings of the robot. Like, so in the 70s, 80s, 90s, she has all these interviews with kids that basically say, well, okay, this is what the robot can do for me right now. Like, it can talk back to me, or it can ask me a question, but soon it will be programmed, and that program will make it even better. A comment that really struck me was a teenager who basically says to the researcher that, I would rather go to the robot for advice about my life than my father, because, I think the robot will be programmed with a lot more data, and the robot will know more about the experiences of teenagers and be able to give me adequate advice, because my father is very limited with his experience. And I just sort of just thought to myself, oh my God, like this, it, he's right on one level and he's so wrong on the other level. And I don't know how to actually express it to you, but I hope you're kind of feeling what I'm feeling with a child thinking, a robot will be programmed to take care of me better than my own parents, and so that idea of like experience and the morality that a parent would come to and the care that a parent would come to is less important than, this programmed robot and the worldview picture they can give a child. Anyway, let me tell you about a few more aspects. So there's this story about kids who are dealing with robotic pets, and one girl says, this is better than a real dog. A real dog, doesn't cry, a real dog doesn't bark, and a real dog doesn't die. And to that, I froze a little bit, because I remember the day in the car when my daughter asked me if my dog is getting old. Right, many of you might know Stella. So Stella's 10 years old, and she's getting a little bit of white hair. My daughter got really concerned about that. That is she getting old? And I said, she is, but it'll take a long time. I told her it's going to take a long time, and she was very, very concerned, a little bit very upset about it. But she came back to me and she said, I'll help her chase birds and squirrels when she gets older, and I'll help feed her. And so, and she sort of settled into it at that point. But, this idea that like she can empathize with what it would be like to be old, and she'll grow with that experience to help my dog, doesn't exist if it's a robot and you can just simply exchange the robot or change the battery. And so are we missing a link of like real growth? Second question, very related, is when you have a robot companion, what happens is you speak to the robot speaks to you. And so, what Sherry Turkle basically says, again, in the book Alone Together, but her work subsequently, is when it comes to toys and dolls, children actually have to like put values on that doll. The doll has a name, the doll has a personality, they play with the doll. And so, their imagination and creativity is working over time. In the interviews with the children, they preferred the robots because they felt that it was just too much work. Pretend play, it was too much work. And so they kind of preferred the robot who kind of gave them ideas and responses. And so the child actually becomes passive. And if you think back to all the advice you might have seen online around like give your children like wooden toys, let them do pretend play. Don't give them these like cheap Chinese toys that like distract them, and do stuff with them, but give them things that they have to do. It's because these essential critical thinking skills, these connection, the dots that you have to make in your head, all this is done when the child exercises his or her own brain. You can see my video around Mind in the Making by Ellen Galensky, where I talk about like the skills that children need to develop. And again, Sherry Turkle is kind of saying the same thing. She's saying that the robot may not actually allow some of these skills to develop, and so that's where the limitation is. Though, even though on the face of it, of course, there's a companion for your child, there are ethical considerations. So there's a robot that was introduced called My Real Baby, and I think it was Hasbro. So they basically switched, the robot went off, this baby went off when somebody would abuse it. And so there was a whole debate among parents. Some parents said, yes, it's good. Let it just go completely off, because I don't want to encourage my child's sadist tendencies. There was another line of parents who said, no, 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 no. It's very cathartic and it's very interesting for children to go through this experience. And that's why even violent video games are okay, because they can like be violent without hurting anyone and kind of see how that feels. So is that essential for development, the ability to cause pain? And honestly, like, I have seen my daughter experiment with my dog a little bit by poking her and things, because they need to understand boundaries. And I don't have a second child, but I'm assuming anybody with two children probably have seen the older one kind of test out the younger one to see what makes it cry. So I do believe that some of these are essential development tools, but can it be done through a robot, or do you really need to do it through a real person? I suppose you can probably do it through both, but it's a very intriguing kind of question, right? Like, what is the ethics of this robot? And then, are we denying children some kind of growth, or are we like encouraging some sadist tendencies because they know in the end it's a robot and it's not their younger brother, right? And mom is not going to come and have the same reaction with the robot that she probably will with the brother. Privacy, obviously, I have to talk about that. Eyes and ears everywhere. And so these robots are taking in what the children are saying. Potentially, the parents get access to all the inner workings. I mean, if my parents read my diary when I was younger, like, I would not be happy, right? But then she says that, people say, well, the unthinkable, this kind of surveillance, whether it's smart homes or smart toys, the unthinkable becomes the standard, it becomes the norm. And so we're moving away. The other thing is, of course, this idea, why do adults actually go and choose these kind of relationships? Because one of the big themes is there is no rejection. And now again, I'm going to ask you, balance it. Somebody who's very lonely, never had a relationship, maybe will never have a meaningful relationship, they say, well, at least I have this AI girlfriend and she loves me and I feel good about it, versus having a human relationship, a give and take, maybe not working out, learning from it, having growth, moving on to the next thing, right? Like, what is a more appropriate way of developing the human race? Um, yeah, virtual relationships basically take the pressure off. People talk about friendships as well. They say, oh, no drama friendships. No drama friendships. I mean, I agree, sometimes friendships are a lot of drama, and people, they expect more from you or they want less from you, and it can be quite confusing to remain a friend to someone, because we're all different people. But you know would I want to replace my friends with robots? I mean, personally, I probably wouldn't, but it's a question to ask. It's a legitimate choice nowadays, right? And then, I heard this podcast, which I love, by the way. It's called Critical Media Studies. And the researchers over there, they basically ask, is Turkle sticking to a old standard of value over here? Like, have the values just completely changed? And she's talking about this idea of authenticity in relationships, human connection, needing to have this push and pull with a real person. And is that just old? Are we done with it? And it's a question that we should ask. Um, Turkle also has a very significant portion of her book that talks about the anxiety that social media brings, and she really is on the early 2010. She captures what's happening with children, where they're like turning away from voice, turning more to messages, they're multitasking. It's a lot of pressure to be able to, like, not switch off. I won't recap a lot of that, because you can go to Jonathan, my video on Jonathan Haidt, and he kind of like recaps it as well, talking about this idea of, like, the anxiety that has been introduced into young people's lives. So Turkle, you can imagine, feels, I think, similarly, where she feels that too much has been brought upon young children, and technology, multitasking, having these online lives and offline lives, and having to curate yourself. It's a little bit difficult, and so I don't think she's a fan of it at all. But obviously, it's a reality of our lives. So I encourage you to go see her on YouTube as well. She's got a couple of talks, and then if you like reading like me, then you can actually read the book as well. Okay, I'm gonna recommend a kid's book. It's called The Hospital Dog, and The Hospital Dog has been chosen, obviously, as you know, because it talks about the value of human or dog connection. And Dot, the hospital dog, actually goes every day to a ward to visit sick children. And they are all so scared to be in the hospital, and they don't know what's going to happen to them. But the moment Dot comes, they can cuddle with Dot, she plays with them, and all the anxieties just settle down, and they just feel so much better. Look at all these little babies feeling so happy with their dog. And then, in a twist, Dot herself actually gets hurt, and she's rescuing a little child, and she gets hit by a car. And look, the car hits her, and oh no, Dot is going to be okay, but she's going to be in a fracture for a couple of weeks. And Dot is really sad. She can't go out anywhere. She can't do anything. And you know what happens? Yeah, you know what happens. all the children of the ward come and visit Dot when she is in need, and Dot feels so happy. And I love this book because it talks about the value of connection. All right, I don't need to make it more obvious, do I? So, Sherry Turkle's Alone Together, and of course, the great Julia Donaldson, The Hospital Dog. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you next time.